And I have to tell it which episode this is. All right, we're on a little bit of a stream delay in terms of
Yeah.
going live, but for the record, this is the Q&A. Actually, let me turn my light on. This is the Q&A after episode 5 of Best of 5, the Classic Tetris Champions. And I'm going to wait for folks to get into the room before we actually give a real intro. But yeah, we're here.
Okay. Yeah. Looks like we showed up.
I think we
This
made
is
it.
new to me, so.
All right, I'm going to put some windows in better places here.
Whoa.
All right, we got some extra Chris's in the chat. We forgot to get we're gonna get like a photo of Chris's this year at CTWC, but I totally
Oh,
spaced out,
geez.
forgot
Our
about
the photo of our parents were not creative.
it.
They all had
Yeah,
the same idea.
it's like, oh, it was the '70s. There were only 4 names available. Oh well.
Oh,
So
yeah. Thanks, Dr. Jules. I didn't know I'd be on today until just a couple of days ago, but it seemed like the right thing to do, and I'm proud to be here and share the viewing. I watched every episode along with you guys, and it was great to relive it, and relive it yet again. All this time portal going on.
yeah, I want to get into it a little bit. Like Chris, I think it's easy for me to forget your overall history, like competitive history in gaming, and then getting involved with this tournament. And we touched on some of that in this movie, but we didn't really go into like your actual history with Sega and Rock the Rock and all that stuff. Do you want to give us a brief summary of like kind of that that
Is
all that
just a
stuff?
crazy. I mean, I don't know where to start, but I
Mm-hmm.
guess the too long didn't read or too long didn't listen it would be. I love video games. Video games have been my life. They kind of saved my life. So I really feel like it's an amazing feeling to be able to give back in some way. And my involvement in the CTWC is like the summation of all of that. My history as a competitive game player started back in 1988, 1989. There was a Hawaii State Nintendo Championships, and the game was Super Mario Brothers with a super good rule set. It was like you got 10 minutes, get as far as you can with as many points as possible. And that basically gave you the incentive to do a speed run back in 1989, which is amazing. Like people didn't do that back then, but I was able to beat the game in like 6 minutes, and I got I don't know like 280,000 points or something. I blew everybody else away because nobody else could beat the game that fast.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first competition that I won. I became the state champion of Hawaii, and then a year later they had the NWC, which also had Super Mario Brothers, Rad Racer, and of course Tetris. And part of this story is that my local regional was Oakland, California, Northern California, because I had to move from Hawaii to California. I was not happy about doing that. I lost all my friends having to move, but it was like a family thing, so I didn't have a choice. But I made the best of it, and I competed at Oakland and was beaten. Came in third place, but it was beaten by Robin Mahara, who was at Oakland as his second city. But that kicked me down to Los Angeles, and that was extremely important. So not only was Los Angeles the city that I won, but it was also like the city that the movie The Wizard took place in, where there's
Mm-hmm.
like a road trip where the kids got to go to Universal Studios, and I got to live like the real road trip of The Wizard. My mom drove me
Uh-huh.
down to Universal Studios with my brother, and I won. And after the competition was over, the friends that I hung out with, there was a guy who also came from Northern California after losing in Northern California. He drove down, not with me, but I met him there, and then we drove back up together. At the end of the tournament, he handed me his business card, and on that business card it said Tengen.
Oh
And in
yeah,
2 weeks,
right.
I was working at Tengen as in the customer service department, game counseling, and testing, and that set me up on my life path to be a video game designer and everything else that I really wanted to do. And Tengen Tetris obviously is a big part of that Tetris history as well.
Yeah, I have a
And
copy back
but that
there. It's yeah.
yeah, that's a big part of losing. I might have mentioned this in chat, but yeah, losing isn't always the worst thing. Sometimes good things can come out of it, and I can definitely say that Robin Mahara kicking my ass in Oakland, sending me down to LA was a great part of that story. And ironically enough, I ended up, working on games like, Rampart and Gauntlet 4 and Primal Rage. Primal Rage was like a huge game, and like I love fighting games and I love dinosaurs, so that was like a dream come true. But then they canceled Primal Rage 2. I ended up at Capcom, worked on Street Fighter and Marvel vs. Capcom, and a whole lot of other stuff that I loved. Eventually, in the year 2000, um, there is a point in time where I had to send out resumes for the only time in my life. And one of the places, like, I only got two, what do you call? I mean, I sent out like 20
Like
resumes, and it's the only time
callbacks
in my
or
life I
whatever.
did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of them I got back was for BPS. So I
Right.
interviewed at BPS, and I met Hank Rogers and Eddie Rogers, and it was really funny because it's like I went there with my Super Tetris 2 plus Bombless cartridge and had him sign, uh, had Hank Rogers sign my cartridge, which is something that people didn't do back in 2000, but I think it actually made an impression. So get this, I don't know if anybody you guys play fighting games, but there's a fighting game called Guilty Gear X, and there's a character named Kai Kiske, and I really like that character. I really like that fighting game. So I made a cosplay for Kai Kiske. It's like one of my best costumes. Like, yeah, I had like the blue and the white and the gold, and there's a cherry blossom parade in San Francisco. And what they'd
Mm-hmm.
do is they'd have a cosplay contest, and if you won the cosplay contest, you got to be on the parade float in the parade for the Cherry Blossom Festival. So I got on, I entered the contest. I won the contest. Uh, so fun fact: after the big gaming competitions, Nintendo, Sega, um, Sony had in the 90s, they stopped having them because they were too expensive to put on. I've wanted to be remain competitive at something. So I started entering cosplay competitions in the 2000s, and I won a lot of those. And another lesson learned is you might not want to win everything because, yeah, I had to learn some hard lessons with that one.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I did win. I got on the float and I got off the float, and I was in Japantown hanging out. And then who do I run into? I run into Eddie Rogers, Hank Rogers' brother. He says, "Hey, Chris, good to see you. Hey, come on to the office on Monday. You got the job." And I'm like, "No way." And I'm like dressed up as Kai Kiske with my sword and everything. And I'm like, "Dude, I got a job."
Yeah.
I started working at BPS, which is, the Tetris company. And I worked on Tetris Worlds, and was game designer and game design consultant, and had a hand in a lot of the stuff they brought out in that era. So the full history of my life is just filled with Tetris, and what better way to give back to Tetris than to help with the competitive community now? So it's great to kind of like complete that circle, and just kind of be involved wherever I can. That's kind of how it is, where it's just like I find things I like to do in video gaming, and then I get involved, and then I'm like, oh well, I didn't know I was good at this thing, so I guess I'll keep doing it. And next thing you know, you're
Yeah.
commentating Tetris for 15 years, and you don't know where all the time went. So
Yeah.
that's my life.
Absolutely.
That's my competitive history, and how it ties into Tetris and all that.
Yeah, and I think that arc makes a lot of sense. Like it's starting out as a competitor and then as a champion. Not every time, right? But then getting into game development and having. I think that to be a great commentator, it certainly helps to have experience, as a player. But having that experience of being a champion, you actually know something that many commentators don't know, which is what is it like to have that spotlight on you as the number one multiple times, and to have that, that get a big money prize, understand what that all means, especially to a very young person. So I think,
Yeah, and also
yeah.
in the era that I did it in, so I'm really happy that the CTWC has become this yearly thing, because
Hmm.
back in my day, it was a one-off. You had one shot to make it all the way, and if you didn't, there wasn't going to be a next year.
Right.
The big contests that Nintendo and Sega and Sony had, they ran them whenever they felt like, and usually that was just once. There wasn't another NWC of that scale. I don't think there was ever one of that scale. They had smaller ones. There was like one in like 2 years later. There's like the Campus Challenge or something, and then they had the one in 2015, and I think there was another one in 2017. But they were not like go to this big event with like every kid in 3 age divisions where you had 100,000 kids like storming the arena trying to become the best Nintendo player in the world. That never happened again.
Yeah.
Or the one for the Sega one, it was the same thing, but it was Hard Rock Cafe in the year 2000 or 1994, and that one was televised on MTV. And well, you don't even see video game competitions televised on TV anymore. So that was like a really once in a lifetime thing when I won the Sega Championships on MTV Rock the Rock.
Yeah. And actually I saw on DMJ's stream last night, he pulled up that footage and looked at it, and it was so interesting to look back at how MTV thought about a tournament, like in terms of televising a tournament. There was no connection between the gameplay footage they showed and what was actually
Yeah,
happening in
that
the
was
tournament. So it's
fake.
like,
I
well,
was mad.
and
Yeah.
a lot of it was like, crowd reactions or like
Yeah.
Daisy Fuentes or whoever it was, just
I think it's because they didn't actually have direct feed,
right. Because
so
the
they
arcade cabinets
probably
maybe
just
didn't have
used what they could.
like a
Yeah.
recording. So it was like, well, I get it. But also from the point of view of like, this is one of the things about Best of Five is I was like, I think that the matches matter. The gameplay
Yeah.
matters
The
in a way.
authenticity.
Yeah. And like I didn't want to show a clip. Like you can do that, and Ecstasy of Order did a really good job of showing meaningful clips, like highlights of games. But I really obviously, now that we've been through 5 hours of this, I wanted to do something that had like a really much bigger scope of that.
And nowadays, with the level of the play that the players exhibit in the well, I wouldn't say use the word modern because modern Tetris means something else, but in the era of hyper tapping and
Right.
rolling, the level of skill that's being executed, having a record of what gameplay was like back in the DAS days, back in 2014, to this level of detail where you can actually see the mistakes being made or what turned the tide, that's excellent. Like that's excellent to have that on record and be able to compare and contrast, watch this and then go to CTWC 2024 and see what's going on and just be blown away. And you can say like,
right,
look how far we've come.
Yeah, because one of the things I assume, and I assumed since I started doing this, is that the logical next step, if somebody was brand new to Tetris and saw this show, was like, okay, then just look around. There's all this content for you. There's all the other CTWCs. There's CTM. There's all this great stuff that's happening. There's live Tetris happening right now. I'm certain on Twitch.
Yeah,
so,
you know what they say, more Tetris than you can handle.
Exactly.
All the time. It's so crazy because when we started this, it was a once a year thing. And now it's just all the time. And, they have this whole calendar of events that we have to look forward to. And there's CTM every month and all these other restreamers and friendlies matches and just crazy, best of 99 is like really cool. And it's just, a lot of content and a lot of community, a lot of ways to engage. And it's good for everybody. And that's why you see the younger players getting interested and making the whole scene more approachable for everyone.
Well, and all the regional events too, I think, are probably pulling in local folks who maybe hadn't considered taking a trip to go to the national championship. Being able to drive to something and say, oh, this is actually pretty exciting. Like within the scope of within this room, someone here is going to win this local thing and help pay for the trip a little bit. So I think that's a really exciting thing too, is to see. And like we used to have maybe 1 or 2 like regional events a year. Now it's like pretty much the whole year. There's just stuff happening all over the place. So I think that's
it's
the growth is
exciting.
I mean,
competitive season.
Yeah, I mean, and the last thing Jonas says in the 2018 interview is it's like still growing. And I think one of the things I'm sad about with the loss of Jonas is that he didn't get to see some of the biggest growth.
The current era is just something. It's a gift to our community, and I would have loved for him to be able to experience and watch, for him to be able to see what he helped to build, which would not have been built without him. Yeah,
absolutely. And that presence is still, at least by me, is still felt, when I was at 2024. And obviously, Sherry, Jonas's mom, got up and spoke, and I was running the camera that had the close-up of her. And that was a very emotional thing to stay on that and not try to not get too emotional about it myself, just because she was talking about Jonas. And also she had a very positive message, which I think again is like, there's something going on in that family, or kind of however the makeup there works, is that, they are very positive people. And I commend her for having the courage to even get up in front of all those people. I don't know that I would. And then for being able to get through it without breaking down. I mean, that's amazing. So that was wild to see.
I am glad that
beautiful.
She did get to see where we're, how far we've come.
Yeah.
And that we remember and we love and we owe so much to Jonas. I think, if anything, being able to show his family through what we do every year, that he lives on definitively in our hearts and everything that our community does. I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and this chapter, the 2014 year, is a crucial chapter in understanding the development of Jonas, I think, because, the first time, it's one thing to win 1 time. It's another thing to win 4 times. And then the first time you lose, how do you handle that? How do you make sense of that? And what happens to you as a person? And I hope I make this point in the film, but my feeling is that that loss actually catalyzed Jonas to being a different kind of champion, where he actually began to share a lot more than he had. And part of that was technology; it became easier for the sharing to occur.
Yeah,
But he really, I think he reflected on what it means to be a champion at that point. And I don't know, he must have previously, but like that, and then taking it back, obviously 3 more years running, he had grown into the Jonas that we really remember the most, and that those,
that's true.
the
You
later
actually
years.
have to. I think in some ways, it takes a loss and
Mm-hmm.
reflection to really grow, not just as a competitor, but as a person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
realizing that, like, you can predict it, but until you actually have to wrestle with it and decide what your path forward is. There's a song, I think it's called Survive. How we survive, it's what makes us who we are. I can't
Mm-hmm.
remember the artist, but I just remember that struck out in my mind. And then what Thor said about life being like Tetris,
Yes.
you got to take what it gives you and make the best of it.
I still think that that is really profound and meaningful and smart and not sad at all. It's really, that means a lot to me, and that actually encapsulates a lot of what I think is interesting about Tetris, right? Like, you really do have to make the best of what you're given. You have to put things in place and just move on, and eventually it will end. And that's a very powerful thing to confront as a human being.
Hmm.
And I don't mean that in a dark way. I just mean like that it gives meaning to understand that there is an end. Without the end, there would, what's the point, right? So the fact
Right.
that
Mhm.
this game enforces an end on every game is a reminder kind of that, the mortality that we all have and how we behave. I think that's the thing about this show. The reason that, you, Chris Tang, end up having the last word there is because you actually encapsulated those thoughts. Um, Talking about, it's one thing for the audience to learn that Jonas died and Jonas was a great person and a great community member, but what should we do? What is the lesson that we pull out of this? That was what I was really hoping to get. And I remember sitting in that studio with an N95 mask on in July 2021, and we were all tired. It had been a long day. We'd already done all the commentary, eaten, come back in. And, we had that interview. And I remember sitting there, going through the questions, and we had talked beforehand about it. We got to at some point, about halfway into it, I remember realizing there was a theme to what you were saying in response to many of my questions. And I remember saying something to you like, Chris, I think there's a theme here, and I think that theme is gratitude, something
Yeah.
like that. And you responded to that, and I want to put that in a bonus feature because like there's more stuff you said. There was like a story about working at BPS and like getting the shoe repair story. Do you remember that one?
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. If that gets put out there, okay,
Well,
that's
actually, we
cool.
can talk about it, but
It's funny
it's
because
yeah,
2024, I saw Hank Rogers again. He actually brought that up. So
yeah,
yeah, check that. Let's see if we get that in special features. Go for it. Yeah,
yeah. But
that might
I
be
think that
interesting.
like when I realized that you were, when I understood, not realized, when I understood that in that moment, I realized, well, I thought, okay, so Chris Tang is the perfect vessel to encapsulate the lesson. And then you did. You just gave me that piece at the end, and I remember thinking in the moment, I'm like, I think this is how the show has to end. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it back in 2021. Like, how am I going to get to this? But that was the goal.
Well,
Starting at that
everything
point.
came together really well. I didn't
Thanks.
predict that I'd be able to end cap it for you, but I'm glad I did. But as a whole, right, they're having a takeaway at the end is super powerful. I'm really glad that it could be about Jonas because
Yeah.
that's what a lot of us in our community. Um, that's what makes us do what we do so well is that we actually have a higher standard to look up to and make the community positive and move it forward. And as that famous quote goes.
Yeah, and I do think one thing that bums me out is like this was Harry's year, and I feel like Harry gets overshadowed a bit in all discussions of Tetris. But even in the show about the year that he wins. So I struggled with that a little bit, but I was like, I have to. There are major facts that happen after 2014, and one of them is that Harry wins and wins decisively, and really celebrates that win, and it's a huge deal. Like that, the fact that Jonas was beatable, I think helped the tournament to then grow and sort of survive,
Absolutely.
right? Because
I really,
if he just
yeah.
ran one straight through, there would be no point. At some point, people would begin to give up and
I
just
think
not go
right. It
back.
would actually just be too predictable, and
Yeah,
uh, I actually like the rivalry between Harry and Jonas. Like there's anticipation. Like if there's anyone who's going to be able to do it, it's probably going to be Harry. I kept saying that year after year,
yeah,
and it finally happened.
yeah. And let's go to some of the questions. And folks, if you have any questions for either of us, now's the time because we're through the whole show. I don't anticipate doing another one of these in the near future. Maybe at some time down the line. Game Scout asked a question earlier. Was it ever considered to do Tray Vision on the CDWC 2013 finals footage? I kind of thought about it. The problem I had was because the footage is pretty bad, but it's probably similarly bad to what we had for 2014. Um, the reason I didn't do it was I only had access to Trey when he wasn't like working his day job for this window of maybe like 5 days. And it was like it was during a lockdown. And I didn't really feel comfortable going back to him and saying, would you mind also doing these other random matches so I can use little snippets of them? So I just used the little, TV recordings, which are pretty rough. But yeah, I never approached him about doing it. So it probably is possible. I know the 2013 game footage it was really rough, But I also thought, well, look, if I put 2013 game footage, I don't really have a good way to split that camera and have the two side cameras. So I thought, well, I'll just let it slide because it's only going to be it's like a 3-minute scene to recap 2013.
I like it. It looked historical,
Yeah.
like a flashback. There's so many productions that try to do fake, chromatic aberration to make stuff look old. But this is like legitimately like that's the stuff. So
Yeah. Adam Cornelius used to have a thing he said, which was in documentary, if you have a piece of source footage that looks crappy, it's okay for it to look crappy because that's part of what it is. Like it's intentional. Like it is what it is. Don't try to like clean it up too much because then you're getting rid of its innate nature, which is it was like
yeah, actually, if you Trey Vision it, it would just look the same as the 2014 stuff, and then there wouldn't be that like
yeah.
retro divide, which was effective. Here's a good question. Tolstoj asks, can there ever be another Tetris version that comes close to NES Tetris in terms of comp, and what would it take for that to happen? Are you? I'm guessing. Well, there's two ways I can answer this. If you're asking if there can be another version of the game released that can be used for competition the same way that we do, there's Tetris Effect Connected, but there's also the possibility, thanks to the mod retro thing that happened this year, Tetris company is licensing cartridges for old systems, and that has never happened before. So now the mod retro Tetris game is a Game Boy Color version of Tetris developed in the year 2024. So if you take that one step further, let's say if Mod Retro makes a FPGA NES system, and then they get a license for Tetris, and then we get involved and say, hey, we would like to have a competition cartridge that hits all these spots that NES Tetris does, and maybe has some other new features, things that enhance the rule set, maybe makes the meta a little more balanced, or something. I don't know. We could do something, right? We could put some real heart and thought into it. And it could be a NES Tetris developed in the modern age with retro sensibilities that makes, since we understand what competitive play can be, like where do we take that next step? There's an opening to do that because the Tetris company is licensing cartridges for retro systems now, which is something that we hadn't considered it before, and I know it's something that Vince has really wanted. So that's a door that I'm very excited about taking. If you're talking about a new version of Tetris that has a competitive potential to be as good as NES Tetris, I would say, Tetris Effect Connected as a whole has so many different modes in it that whether it's the classic score attack or their regular game modes, that's about as good as you can get. I'm pretty happy with it, and I can't wait to see where they take it. The one thing I would like to see them do, though, is to do the Street Fighter 6 thing, like what they did with James Chen. They put him in as a commentator. I'd like to see them put Tetris Effect Connected use our voice clips for commentary, so you can play like classic score attack, and I'll say like, oh, that's not survivable, and he tops out, or boom, Tetris 4, and then maybe they'll like put my voice syllables together, and they'll say, Jeff, or
Yeah,
whatever other
we could
name
probably
you
train
could
an
have.
AI on voice clips
Yeah.
because there's so much of you guys talking in an isolated recording, so
So
that's
many actors are
doable.
so afraid of like AI, and I'm like, yeah, AI my voice, so I can say Boom Tetris for whatever your name is,
Yeah,
and
right.
it's all good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also one of the things I just want to comment on that question about is there another version of Tetris in the NES Tetris competitive community. Often we kind of ignore the larger Tetris competitive community, the other versions, and I've often seen people who play NES Tetris often don't play any other version. They just this is what they start with and this is where they end. But of course, there is like a lot of modern Tetris variants. There's lots and lots and lots of them, and I think Tetris Effect Connected, from my limited knowledge, probably is like the starting point for and maybe the finishing point for most of those. But we had Blink from Hard Drop.
Mhm.
I interviewed him, and he only appears like for a few seconds in the show, but there was a long interview where he just explained like, okay, there's like Tetrio, there's Puyo Puyo Puyo, there's all Tetris Friends, which I mean, like a lot of these have been shut down, but there are ways to access them later. So there is a larger world out there and a competitive
Yeah.
landscape too.
And I remember we used to have side tournaments for
Mm-hmm.
TTM. Alex would bring his arcade board, and it would be cool. Corian won one year. That's how he
Yeah.
got one of those trophies before he ended up getting second that one year. It was great when we had those, but now there's just so much going on. But then, now we have sponsors like Enhance has their own booth. So that's our kind of like our parallel. We have a sponsor that brings a modern game, and we can give it some more attention. And I have actually kept up with some of the discussions, and the modern Tetris community is actually they're trying to find answers as to like why does NES Tetris get all the attention, and
Mm-hmm.
some of the answers are actually really, they make sense. Like, it's easier to follow, it's a better spectator game, players can play along with their minds, and then
Yeah.
they can actually kind of play, and when they play the game, they find out it's really hard, but yet they can still understand it. They don't have to learn like four wide and all these like versus things, and they don't have to worry about like playing versus. They can
Mm-hmm.
play at their own pace, go for a max out. There's a lot of things that makes NES Tetris accidentally more enjoyable for a broader audience. There's so many
Yeah.
happy accidents. I mean, the whole
Yeah. Exactly.
colors to rebirth, boss levels. It's like, if God ever made a game,
Uh-huh.
we're beginning to think, there's some kind of divine thing going on with NES Tetris, because no matter how far we push this thing, it keeps getting these added layers of depth that should not exist. It's like one of the
Right.
greatest mysteries of the universe, but I'm here for it.
Yeah, it is super rad, and it is such a strange thing that this version, a game from '89, is still revealing new and frankly interesting challenges. And there's one on the board right now, Rebirth, like somebody actually rolling over the level counter. That has not yet
Yeah.
happened at the time of us
And
talking.
there's anticipation for it, right?
Any
Like, we
day.
have our
Yeah.
Discord with like alerts, like
Yes.
condition red,
Condition
condition
red.
red, go
Oh,
watch
he's
the stream.
we're on the green level. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
super interesting, and I think like one of the things we talked about over the years is I call it legibility. The NES Tetris is very
Yeah.
legible, like
Mhm.
readable. Like if you look at it, you can just be like, even if you've never seen it, I think you can figure out what is happening and like, oh, okay, so I'm going to put blocks here, here, here. Okay, whereas modern Tetris, there's so much stuff going on, especially with the floor rising for reasons that are not visually apparent. Like what just happened, I don't understand it. So it looks faster, and it is faster. It's just different. There's so much that I think it's difficult to clue in as a brand new person as to what's going on. And so I remember when we actually shot the interview with Blink, and he showed us some modern Tetris. I had seen some of that stuff a little bit, but my camera operator Carl King, who's in the chat, was kind of like, is this real life? Like, what's happening here? This is too fast. What's going on? And he's like, no, this is really happening. He's like, are you actually playing that fast? And he's got a keyboard, and he's going, and there's like, pieces going everywhere. Because, of course, he's Blink. He's
Yeah.
amazing.
And once you get into things like Seven Bag, you
Mhm.
actually know like the deck, like it's
Yeah.
like a card deck, and you know what pieces and what combinations are possible. They have all that programmed into their mind,
Yeah,
what
that
their
pattern.
possibilities are
Yeah.
ahead of time,
Mhm.
and that happens. Like, they have to execute on it so fast because the player that they're playing against is doing the same thing. So there's no room to actually make it more legible. That's just how it plays. And I think it's kind of like a design conundrum. Once they went that route, they opened this Pandora's box, and they have to maintain that version of modern Tetris. But in a sense, like what we did, just kind of like doing our own thing with the classic Tetris community, it kind of opened the door for them to be able to go back to something that's more legible.
Mhm.
And the fact that they have classic modes, like that mod retro game has a classic mode in it that takes away some of the modern rules. So and also the classic score attack and Tetris Effect Connected shows that they're willing to allow those rule sets to exist. Now, back when I worked at
Mm-hmm.
BPS, they were adamant to make Guideline the one and only version of it, and there were very few like versions that snuck through with rule changes or rule variants. The one that I liked. So my favorite game. This is an aside and kind of changing the subject just a little bit, but there's a version of Pokemon Pikachu Tetris for the Pikachu 2. It's like this little virtual pet that has a cartridge slot on it. They made a version of Tetris for that, and that was my favorite version of Tetris that
Uh-huh.
that they released when I was working there. That I had to evaluate and write reports on it because it was the closest to classic Tetris that they ever got in that era.
I got it. Okay. Cool.
Okay, we got more questions. Someone asked me, what was it like doing commentary for a competition that I already knew the outcome? So I've been doing this for, well, at the time, it was like 12 years at the time. Now it's 15, but back in 2021, there had been years, and I don't remember all the details of every single match. So even though I knew maybe the final outcome, the road to that outcome wasn't something that was fresh in my mind. So when James and I were commentating that, we were still reacting to what was going on in the game, the blows and the trades and the misdrops. They still hit us authentically, and we commentated on them in real time. The thing I was focusing on is making sure that Chris Higgins got what he wanted, and
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be there for as long as it took, whether it took one take or 20 takes. We are going to get that thing done, but I guess we did it in one take, so it's all good.
Yeah. It
So
was
that was the thing I was focused on, and not really focused on I know the outcome. It was just to call the match as if it were a match that was happening before me in real time and without giving any spoilers.
Yeah, and I think to be able to do that live in real time is such a complex thing, especially keeping in mind that the time period it was the 7th month of 2021 and Jonas had died 6 months earlier. So like to be talking about him and trying to understand, like, am I talking in the present tense? Like, what am I doing? And you guys were very consistent and just did it. And I think if we had talked about it more, it might have made it more confusing. But somehow you guys just kind of found a place. Like we're in 2014 now, and that is modern times, and you just went through it. I did.
Yeah, I think
It
there
was
was a
sometimes
balance.
funny.
Yeah, if we had too much overhead, it might have affected us a bit, but I think
Hmm.
it was just the right balance. There are a few things we needed to cover, and then we just call it like a real match, and there we go.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, a
Don't
question about
disturb
anime
the
in the
timeline.
chat. If there was an
What's that?
anime of Tetris, what would you call it?
Um, hmm. I'm not sure yet. It's something I've thought about. I have like a vision of what it would be like in my head, but the actual title, it's got to be something really good,
Hmm.
and I guess it has to be something Tetris related, something really catchy, like um the title of the game Tetris Effect. I think is amazing. So it'd be
Yeah,
something like that, something that really
iconic.
yeah, something that encompasses Tetris yet shows like I think I'd call it like Tetris Generations or something
Mm-hmm.
like
That's a good
something
title.
that shows like a progression from you start off with something very simple and then it just grows and powers up like like anime characters do, but it's based on something in real life. And I think that's the most amazing thing about our community is that I grew up watching anime like Initial D and Hikaru no Go, and they were like sports animes, and they did these techniques that like when you watch them animated in the anime, you're like, this is like crazy. This couldn't exist in real life. This is superhuman. This is supernatural. But yet we have that in reality with what the players are doing with classic Tetris. And then now we have this whole storyline. There's like a parallel storyline. There's the players, and then there's the game itself. And like I alluded to earlier about like this divine game design that has all these happy accidents that keeps it progressing further and further. And the more we break it, the more it reveals like this hidden layer of depth that we didn't know existed. And I think that huge, like, I wouldn't call it ominous. It's more like this ethereal presence that's Nest Tetris, from that was designed by some higher power to challenge the limits of human possibility,
Hmm.
is this overlying arc of the anime, and that us as players, us as humans, dare to challenge it, and maybe someday we'll hit rebirth.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
certainly in the early years, I remember that the coincidence that a max out was right at the edge of kind of human ability. Basically, it was, and it took you so much practice and learning especially with mainly with DAS, to be able to achieve that, and it would happen typically right before, like on 28 or a little bit before that. And it seemed like such a wild coincidence that you would hit that million point mark
Yeah.
right before the game becomes literally unplayable. And it's like it would be hard to design that intentionally, And I don't think that was an intentional design. I think it just sort of
Yeah,
happened
I
that way.
always called it like a happy accident of
Mm-hmm.
design, and it was always a question of like, did the developers actually test it to the point where they knew it was possible, but barely?
Uh,
But the fact that it was balanced, or whether it was intentional or
Balanced or
not,
unbalanced, like
yeah,
somehow that led us to
it
go for that
got
goal.
people to make that a bucket list challenge for their life, to go for that. And that's when you have a goal that's like just barely achievable and you got a few people who have done it, it makes it appealing to go and go for it. And even for myself, like, see, the thing is, I know that I could do it. I just need time, and I'm busy doing other stuff.
Yeah,
So I want to
right.
actually like set aside the real time to go and do it. But I know that because people have done it, and I know it's still a hard challenge and it's still appealing to me, that it's worth going for. And having that stepping stone exist for all players who might be watching classic Tetris now is really important. And I know there's discussions about changing quals, and I think it's dangerous if you kill the max out in quals, because you got to have someone with their nests in their basement, or maybe it's one that their parents had. They need to be able to get the regular nest cartridge, hook
Mm-hmm.
that thing up, play it, and then get an achievable goal, something that sets a standard that you don't have to buy like a special modified cartridge for. Something that the max out represents. That you can just stick the game
Yeah.
in. If you can max out, then maybe you have a shot at getting in a bracket at CTWC. I think there's something beautiful about that.
Yeah, and it's also very legible, right? Because when it hits 999, it
Yep.
stops, and like so anybody can understand that they've capped it out, and there's no modification necessary, like you're saying, to do that.
Yeah,
Having that
it's cause for
accessible.
celebration. You can't move
Yeah,
it any higher without a game genie. So
yeah, exactly.
that's something. Part of the lore of classic Tetris is you get your max out. That's
Mm-hmm.
you're on your way to becoming a world class player if you can do that.
Yep. And by the way, one other thing on the naming, I sometimes got the question, why did you name this thing Best of Five? Without going on a whole tangent, I do have a spreadsheet of name options. I'm just going to scroll down here and see how many there were. Yeah, there were 16 possible names. Um, and some of these are like one is called Pushdown Points, Unwinnable Game, Blocking the Master, Topping Out, Maxing Out, the Tetris Champion, Master of Blocks, Playing to Lose. All of them, I looked at like, is there already something named this? Is it like a trademark of somebody? And Best of Five was in that list, and I found out there was a TV show about, I think, tennis that was called Best of Five like a couple decades ago. But it wasn't active. It's not still made. And so I'm like, there was nothing else that I could find called Best of Five. So I thought, well, it's also free promo every time somebody has a Best of Five match that they'll just say the name of the show. And it seemed like a really open space. Also, it's clearly not a trademark or anything. So that's sort of where I landed. And then once I picked that, then all the fives became apparent, like 5 episodes, 5 years, five top seeds. That those are our main people that we're going to focus on. There's all these fives, and also you can kind of look at it as, who is the best out of those 5 years. There's different ways to look at that, right? And anyway, there's even things like, if the 2013 finals had been best of three instead of best of five, that the literal change of the rule set would make the outcomes different in some cases. So there's just little things where just talking about fives came in quite a bit.
Yeah, I do like that it was like the fifth year that
Mm-hmm.
you can highlight a lot of these different five things and work that in. I didn't notice that until later. And actually, before you see the movie or the series as
Mm-hmm.
it is now, with 5 episodes, it isn't as apparent. So, you're thinking like, well, only the last match in the grand finals is a best of five. Everything else is a best of three. So why is it
So why
named
is this
that?
called
But
this? Yeah.
you actually have to watch it first to understand that. Okay, we've got a bunch of more questions. Let's see. Oh, how has my Tetris commentary evolved or stayed the same over the years? So it's definitely evolved. When I started out doing it, my only point of reference, which there's another question I'll be able to answer along with this. The Tolsaj one about the Tris Tris Tris. Okay, so my only point of reference was the NWC announcers, and back then the kids didn't make Tetrises all that often. So it started off with me saying, boom, Tetris every time somebody made a Tetris, because that was what was the expected thing for a Tetris commentator to do, because that's what they did in the NWC. But of course, Tetris has happened all the time in in the highest level of play. Like, that's
Hmm.
what you need to do. So to evolve the commentary, I had to come up with, like, okay, well, what actually determines the outcome, the victor, and that is score. And what's important is how much risk reward that they're taking in the moment to moment. Are they playing aggressive? Are they playing defensive? Are they in a dig? How many Tetrises are they ahead or behind? How aggressive do they need to play? Are we neck and neck? If you're neck and neck, then that means you better pour on the aggression, because your opponent is like right on your heels, and you could lose if you're not aggressive enough. And that's how my commentary evolved, is because I needed to zero in on what mattered for the match in the moment to moment, and what the players had to deal with, and what determined the outcome in the end. And I got better and better at it. I thought I was terrible at it at first, because I didn't have a good point of reference for our rule set, and our rule set kept evolving. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
really important in 2015, 2016, especially when we had same P sets, and we are able to start counting things like the droughts and that sort of thing. That my commentary was able to keep up with that and make the most of the rule set at the
Hmm.
time. And once it solidified in 2016, I think things got a lot better after that. And it's funny, because 2016 was a year that Boom Tetris for Jeff happened. That's a whole other saga. But I think a lot of people know that because of the Boom Tetris for Jeff, and I kept saying that over and over again, it became this meme, and it got a lot of the younger players. Joseph, there was that one year, I think it was 2020, where they had all the interviewers, and like half the competitors said that Boom Tetris for Jeff got me into Tetris. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, that was a lot bigger than anyone had thought that it would become.
Yeah.
So yeah, commentary became important. I started taking it a lot more seriously right around that time, 2016, 2017. And I'm like, there's a lot of eyes on us now. When I first started out doing this thing, like, they weren't even up on YouTube, right? Like, they weren't
Yeah.
they weren't putting them all up until like years later. It was all retroactive. So I'm like, wait, people want to watch this stuff? And I'm like, this is embarrassing. I did a terrible job. I better get on my game and improve and do better. So around 2017, I just really locked in and started taking it seriously.
Well, and also somewhere in there, co-commentators. So other people, because a lot of these early years, it was just one person at a time holding one mic. I wonder how that affected things when you began to have a second person to bounce off of.
Yeah, it lightens it up a bit, because there's times when it's like, well, not a whole lot's going on. They're on level 18. They're early on. They're always neck and neck. No big digs. It's like
Yeah.
it having two people, you can kind of bounce things off of each other and notice things, and it does help. Solo is good too. I enjoy both, and
Yeah.
I've been paired with all sorts of hosts over the years. Everyone from James Chen to Sharky and Vandy and Kingsman. They've all been great to work with, and just it's more Tetris than you can handle. And commentary is a fun part of it. And I think it started out as something that I was afraid of, because I didn't
Hmm.
think I was doing a good job, but it's
Mm.
turned into something that I actually enjoy, and I enjoy finding new things to poke humor at, or to entertain the audience. I think getting the audience reaction is probably my new thing, where it's just like, I want to find something that's really memeable and adorable, and then people like really enjoy, and maybe that'll be something that they'll talk about in the chat, or it'll
Yeah.
explode chat.
Boom
I think
Tetris in your mouth, for example.
yeah, Boom Tetris in your mouth was a good
Yeah.
one. I think I broke chat when I said what did I say?
Well, there was, I
Boom
remember.
Tet Boom Tet stop for Tristris. Broke the chat.
Tristop is one of our players, and
Yeah,
um,
Tristop.
I remember the year when people were saying, I don't know if you started it, like "this is awesome" to mimic one of the chants in the
Yeah,
audience.
there's like a wrestling thing where they say this is awesome, and
Uh huh.
you could
Well,
say a
then
whole bunch
at one
of
point, I
things.
think you said "can't change rule set" because somebody was saying
Yeah,
like, "let's please cap this" or something, and you're like,
it was that one year, right, where they could play forever.
"Yeah,
So that was
yeah,
it's
2022, I think, right?" Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that was 2022,
All
the
right, we've
year.
got a couple more in here. Mark is
Yeah. Oh
asking,
yeah. Oh,
"What do you
so
think of the?"
I was gonna
Oh
get
yeah.
to the okay. So my point of reference was Terry Lee Torak, especially
Mm-hmm.
would be the one that would say boom Tetris. He wouldn't say for the name. That was something I added.
Mm-hmm.
But when Terry actually commentated my winning round at Universal Studios, he said, "There's a Tetris for Chris Tang," and I was just like, that's like very special because he actually
Yeah.
said, didn't just say Chris, he said Chris Tang.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, attaching a name to Tetris. He didn't say Boom Tetris. They didn't really boom my Tetrises. I don't know why. I guess I made them too often. But he did attach my name, and that
They.
now always stuck out of my mind, and that kind of gave me a point of reference to add the name. Now the Tris thing,
Mm.
that is actually something connected to NWC. So Terry Lee Torok had a DJ. It was like an MTV DJ, Steve Trikas, I think it was his name, and he had a soundboard. And this guy would actually, have these sliders and DJ mechanisms. And when Terry Lee Torok would say, "There's a Tetris," the DJ would push this button and it would do this
Really?
reverb thing. So it would say, "There's a
Oh.
Tetris, Tris," but it wouldn't be Terry Lee Torok actually saying it. It would be an effect on the DJ board, and I just thought it sounded cool. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna do that, but I'm gonna do it for real. So, that's what it is.
Biologically, yeah.
It's a shout out to the NWC, but it's a biological echo effect with my built-in DJ deck.
You're really good at it. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's I've never heard anybody people is try to emulate it, but I don't think they've quite gotten the, you've got that real talent for it. There's a question here. Someone's asking about what do you think of Logan Paul beating Chris Tang in Tetris? Chris, I think you were there. I was pointing a camera at y'all.
I had a job, and I think I did it very well.
Good answer.
I've gone on record, saying like I knew what the situation was, and I had to think of how to play in a way that everybody wins. And as I've been saying earlier, sometimes the best way to win isn't to actually win. Sometimes losing is actually a good thing. And I will say this though, had Logan not actually been the kindest, classiest, and most respectful that I could ever expect him to be, I would have taken him out.
Mm-hmm.
But he was excellent to us, and
Like
a
as
lot
an
of people
individual
may
in the
criticize
moment.
him for
Yeah.
whatever he's done in the past. But if you want to say like Tetris community is a positive thing, why not give him a path to redemption? Why not give him something positive to do? Why not allow him to work hand in hand with us for the best possible outcome for both our community and maybe helping to improve his image to show that he's positive, really cool. There's a thing in wrestling, he's a pro wrestler, putting someone over, and he put over Blue Scooty. And in order to put over Blue Scooty, well, maybe I had to put Logan Paul over.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something beautiful about that. And I was just so honored to be a part of that. I did not know I would even be interacting with Logan Paul until that morning. I was booked. My match was booked against Alex T. So I was getting ready to get, the Parmesan Nightmare get destroyed by Alex T. And I actually
then the bracket changes.
Yeah, it completely changes, and they put me against Logan Paul. And all of a sudden, all the training I did on Mod Retro Tetris to take out Alex T was now turned into a skill set for performative gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a different, it was a new exercise. Like, Alex Kerr will say, doing the secret grade is it exercises your mind and it makes you think of Tetris in a totally different way. Performative gameplay is actually something new to me that I had to figure out in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you notice, I was looking back at the screen. That was
Yep.
not actually what you might think. I was actually trying to test to see what the lag differential was for time, because if you screen look when you play NES Tetris on a CRT, you could just look to the right or to the left and actually see your opponent's screen. I couldn't do that with the Mod Retro Game Boy Tetris. His screen was yay big, and I couldn't see what his score
They're
was. I actually
size.
had to use the big screen to make sure that I was in complete command of the situation.
Yeah.
That I was.
Yeah, you were. And by the way, I think you're right to point out that I am one of those people who, if I hear the name Logan Paul, I'm not a fan. But one thing that was consistent being on staff there is everybody I talked to who actually interacted with that guy on that day said he was courteous and fun and nice, and he actually cares about Tetris and is there for the Tetris.
I could tell.
Later seeing that video, I'm like, okay, actually, I get that.
Yeah,
and
the video that he made.
Yeah, I had to kind of separate that from past behavior, but I'm like, if you do separate those things,
a lot just from the way he was behaving, that his heart was in this. He played Tetris all his life, and this was a dream of his, and he wanted to make sure that not only did he do a good job for Mod Retro and put on a good show for everyone, that he was fulfilling something he's always wanted to do all his life. And I think that giving him that
Hmm.
gift is something beautiful. Why not do that? I had the shot to be a Tetris champion when I was a kid. Being able to see someone else live that dream, no matter who they are, no matter what path that they took to get it, is something beautiful too. Maybe from this, maybe they'll pay it forward. Maybe I'll get to do some pro wrestler spot someday, which I've
Yeah.
always wanted to do.
Sweet. Yeah. All right. Let's see who else is talking about stuff in the chat. Bum.
Yeah, there might be some more questions that I might have missed,
Oh,
but
one question. Do you miss the relative innocence of classic Tetris in the 2010s?
um, so I kind of understand what the question is. There's sort of like a smaller community. It wasn't as I don't know, with the rolling play styles. It's like really serious now. So maybe back then it seemed a little I wouldn't say approachable. It was different. Um, I miss parts of it, but I think a lot of it still exists.
Hmm.
Sometimes you still have the veterans and the old guard come out to the contests. We had Harry there, we had Jeff there, we had at PRGE last year. We had I can't. There's a Legends tournament. Yeah, the Legends tournament. Robin was there, Ben Mullen was there. Um, there's echoes of that in our community that won't go away. We still have the spirit of Jonas with us, having Sherry Neubauer there on stage at 2024. Um, Things have changed, things have evolved, but it's so beautiful, like seeing the entire progression from where we came to where we are. I think there's still a place for that innocence. And I think when we're going to have events like the Jonas Cup at Portland this year, we're going to see that continue to live on. I don't think it's going to go away.
Yeah, well said. And I'm looking forward to Jonas Cup a lot. I know you'll be there too, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'm planning. I have almost everything lined up, but there are a
All
few
right.
loose ends. But I'm planning to be there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like in some ways the innocence of 2010s, like I wouldn't say I miss it per se. It's just different, right? Um it is a progression, and you can have nostalgia for something like that and say like, this is it was different in that the scene was so small that like uh it was kind of almost hard to fill a 32 bracket with serious contenders. You'd have a lot of people who kind of had walked
Yeah,
in
it's
off
like,
the
how are we
street
gonna find more
early.
people to max out the game? Look
Yeah.
where we are now. It's like,
And where
oh
we are now
no.
is like, but the thing is, like, the flip side of that is, I think it's beautiful now that we have people coming in and just saying, I saw this on the internet and I think it's interesting. How do I do it? They get into it and they have a path to do things like get a max and then like get that on the leaderboard and then get into competition too, like get into the like the lower brackets of stuff. And then that's how all of our champions have come into this.
Mhm.
So there's no champion in the modern era of classic Tetris who was born playing this. They've all discovered it and then had to get good, and then they got to be the best in the world. So I think that is still accessible and possible for new people is really important to the health of the community.
Yeah, and having role models like Blue Scooty, really young,
Mm-hmm.
being that dominant, that fast, showing, he has groupies, he has fans, he has other kids that are like way younger than him that are looking up to him, that are going to be able to follow the path and become future champions. And I love seeing that. That's the most beautiful thing, is for the new generations of players to be inspired, because back when it was just 30, 40 somethings playing the game that they played when they were a kid, do you grow that? How do you grow that? How do you
Yeah.
get young people interested in it?
When I think related to that,
I didn't.
there's a good
Yeah.
question in the chat that feeds right into that, which is, can you talk a little bit about when Joseph won
Yes,
and how that
Joseph,
affected things?
extremely pivotal, because Joseph was the one who received the torch from
Mm-hmm.
Jonas and showed the teenagers, the next generation, what was possible. And that led to the utter wave of the generation that we have now, which is made up mostly of players from that generation. Now there's like this third one, the Blue Scooty kind of generation. But yeah, Joseph was really the one who showed every player, no matter how old, how young you are, it is possible to be a Tetris champion. When you had that headline, teenager, beat 7-time world champion. And it's just like, all of a sudden, it's not just 30, 40-year-old guys who played this old game. Now it's something that you can play, you can train, you can get good, you can become a Tetris world champion, and it's something positive and something kind of cool and kind of quirky and kind of interesting. I still don't understand why it hits all those sweet spots for the new generation of players, because you don't really see this in other types of competitive video games.
Hmm.
Like, for instance, like fighting games. I don't see a wave of blue scooties like, all of a sudden becoming great at Street Fighter 6. It's just not happening. It's mainly kind of like this core like esports generation that plays that sort of thing. But Tetris seems to have this huge like variety of the generation of players. You had people who grew up with it as a kid playing it, and you have people who weren't even born yet becoming competitive at it.
Yeah. And I would guess that, one of the things about NES Tetris that it has going for it is the ability to play that game and do other things like communicate on voice chat or listen to music or whatever. You see that, or even read your literal stream chat. Some of these games don't lend themselves to that ability to kind of like have other parts of your brain free. This really does. And I wonder if that's part of it is the streaming, aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the best players say that they're just chatting with their friends, and they're
Often
just
even during like online competitive
roaming
matches, they've
around.
got a
Yeah,
headset and
sometimes
they're,
huge things are happening,
yeah,
and they're just playing. And I think
yeah.
that's kind of cool. And maybe there's a way. So I believe that if you perform an activity and you push it to the part of your brain that's not at the front,
Hmm.
you
Right.
can kind of do it in your peripheral cognitive activities. You're going to have a better like subconscious ability to react to it. So if you're just playing Tetris and you're playing at the highest level and you're not even really straining, and you're just talking to your buddies or hanging out or having fun, um, doing something else, then that's actually like a boss level of skill, right? Like,
Hmm.
you don't even need to be trying, and then you might be able to better play those boss levels where you got to go through 800 levels of Tetris to get to the next thing when you're going for rebirth or something, right? Because you're
Yeah.
used to just playing it in the background, and you're not like going all in, adrenaline going for like 3 hours. You can kind of just cruise
Hmm.
control and line out if you need to.
Yeah, I think about that a lot, that to be able to train yourself to have a mindset, it's like meditation or something like that, where you'd have to really, I don't know, work is maybe the wrong word, but have practice to continually say, like, this is the position mentally that I'm trying to be, and do that, get comfortable with that, so that when you are 1,300 lines into a rebirth run, you don't start panicking because you realize, oh, I'm actually kind of like I have a hot game going, that you're able to keep, re-inhabiting that same stable place. That's difficult for anybody at any age, but I'm impressed to see people who are working. That's, I think, part of it, to be able to get those things, and part of it's also physical. Frankly, being able to play for 45 minutes or an hour constantly at the highest level while paying attention the whole time, like, yikes. There's a question for me. Kingsman asks, Q for Higgins, have you gotten feedback from any of the veterans who were there in 2014 about the film? Do you see them going to Jonas Cup being inspired by the series? Good question. I have not gotten a ton of feedback from the veterans, aside from people just saying like thumbs up, essentially. Um, I did see Terry watching the show, because he's now a personal friend in Portland. And I was curious how he would see his portrayal in the film, because I mean, as you all have seen now, there's a lot of points where he says big things, and I was wondering whether he'd see that as like, oh, Higgins took all the moments where I said something controversial and put those in, which I mean, I did, but that's because most people didn't say controversial things. So if if somebody says a big claim, put it in there. Like, that's part of what the story was. One other thing to know about that, by the way, is that big claim of I'm really confident that I'm the best Tetris player in the world was made in an interview 2 weeks after he lost the tournament to Jonas. So the
I
fact
didn't
that,
know that.
yeah, if you look back at it, that's the post interview when he says that. Now, we wouldn't have no way of knowing that from the way it's presented in episode 1, but he's interviewed like 3 or 4 different times, and those different interviews are happening at different times. So anyway, I felt like, well, if that's your attitude after the tournament, weeks later, it is your attitude, and it was his attitude. It was legitimately, that's where he was coming from. So, I mean, he seems cool with it. I haven't heard from Harry if he's watched the show yet, so I don't know yet. I saw him in Pasadena, and he was like excited for it. So I was like, okay, cool. I sent him a free link. But yeah, I'm curious to hear more folks about it, and I really do hope that Jonas Cup or possibly tournaments like it, for example, the online DAS stuff that CTM is doing, will bring some of these folks out of retirement, because I think there is a place. I know there's a place for them to play, and it's just that right now that place is not at the top competitive level of CDWC, and so it's unfortunate that we've lost this whole like several generations of great players who are still really good at this, and I think may be interested in doing it, but at this point they see no reason to spend money and go out to a thing because they can't
So
win. You know.
there is something that I think I can kind of add to that. So seeing this happen, seeing how like there's like a couple of holdouts. I think Jeff Moore
Mm-hmm.
has done such a good job of just really hanging in there every year. Like no matter how far DATS and the old guard, gets obliterated by the rollers, it's kind of inspired me because, like I said, I know I'm gonna max out. I can learn rolling, whatever. I actually have a lot of different hand techniques for controllers, and a lot of them are just like rolling. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
you ever see me play Street Fighter, I play Street Fighter like no one would ever believe because I cross my hands and
Mm-hmm.
I do flapping and I do like crazy things. I can play one-handed. There's a lot of stuff I can do. But anyway, seeing the old guard kind of falling out of interest in a certain way, like you said, the top level of competitive play, maybe they're not there. But if you have something like a DAS tournament, sure. What they don't have is they don't have the Jonas factor and they don't have the Blue Scooty factor of
Mm-hmm.
an old dude learning rolling, destroying a teenager,
Right.
and getting the job done.
Right.
That's what they need.
And Matt Martin
And
was sort of on that path, but I
yeah,
sort
he
of
was on that
backed
path.
away from
And then
it.
I heard Green Tea took up rolling for a little while, didn't really stick with it.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, we haven't seen the old dude with the rolling yet. Am
Right.
I gonna have to do
That's a
it?
thing that could
Am I gonna
happen.
have to take up
Yeah.
arms and
Yeah. Take the headset off and
it's
go on
like
stage.
get that Thanos gauntlet. Okay, I'll do it myself.
Now that would be an arc, right? To go from
Right.
all the way back to go to what you've done to come. Anyway, that would be really interesting. That's worthy of its own documentary right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I mean, to give a little hint, when I'm doing other crap, I'm doing controller exercises with
Mm-hmm.
my hands in different ways. I actually had an interesting discussion with Ren and Eric. I believe it was Eric ICX. We are talking about it, about some alternative control methods that they may be allowing in the future,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
that could possibly open door to being able to compete on that level. And if I have the motivation
Yeah.
and the time, main thing is
It's
I do
time.
not have the time.
Right.
I'm a game developer. I have all this other stuff. Even getting the commentary part of my involvement in CTWC is incredibly difficult. And even me being on here doing this now, it was a happy coincidence that I'm reconfiguring my living room to do documentary filming and streaming. That actually fit into this perfectly. Otherwise, I wouldn't have time to do this. I wouldn't want to test my setup, but I wanted to test this setup, and also, as a thanks to Chris Higgins for doing such a great job on the film, to be able to help promote it any way I can, to give back just a little bit. I'm really happy to be here. But yeah, it's really hard to find time. I
Yeah.
play NES Tetris like once every 2 years for exhibitions. Like the last time I actually played was when they had me against Steve DeLuca on the Shredder back a couple of years ago.
Right. Uh-huh.
Right. Yeah. So that's when I played NES Tetris.
Yeah.
But so the thing about me in competitive gaming is that I've never told anybody this really, but I pride myself on how well I can do with as little practice as possible. So I'll just like not practice, and I'll have everything kind of like keyed in the back. I'll practice a little bit, right? And
Uh-huh.
I'll get to the point where I'm confident, and then I'll show up and I'll destroy everybody, and then it's all good.
Uh-huh.
And then I'm like, okay, well, I didn't, sacrifice this huge amount, and yet I still came away with a win. So it's like that. I'm like that on games that aren't competitive. Like there's Elden Ring, and I destroyed
Mm-hmm.
that game in less than a week, and I'm like, see, like, I completely went through this game. I did all these things. I even, like, did a bunch of sequence breaking that no one else found. I destroyed the game in a week and I never went back to it. And I'm like, yeah, I blew away Elden Ring. Like, I
Yeah.
like being able to say that.
Hmm.
So I want to have that kind of power going in if I ever become competitive at Nest Tetris again. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and the framework you're talking about there, one of the things I tried to do in this movie that didn't really make it in was I've been really obsessed over the course of my life and in the making of the series with the distinction between what I call talent and then skill. And that's a simplified way of saying a talent is something that you have an innate trait where you're good at something, and skill is something where you've practiced to become good at something. But there are some things where I've seen people who like pick up a guitar and they're just good at it. They have it, or like they're not immediately, Steve Vai or something, but they get there. They have an ability built in, and then they can develop that ability. And I think what I would imagine for Chris Tang here is that you have a serious talent for gaming as like a generalized skill, and then of course a lot of skill that you've built up over decades of doing this stuff, and working in the dev side, understanding how games are built, all that stuff comes
Oh yeah.
together.
Actually, the thing that I get the greatest joy out of is breaking games like relentlessly. Like, I'll
Uh-huh.
find, like, I'll
Uh-huh.
smell blood in the water when a game is starting to glitch, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
just, like, I'll tear it a new one. Like, I think there's this game Fallout 4. It's by Bethesda, and they make kind of janky stuff that, if you find a way in, you could, like, tear it a new one. And I fully tore it a new one. I even wrote a magazine article about it in Old School Gamer magazine if you want to read more about it. But yeah, breaking games was something that I did when I was a kid. I found, like, all these nest tricks that some of them haven't even been found yet,
Yeah.
and I continue to do that. I actually play, like, I play Helldivers 2, and I found a bunch of stuff in that like, I play solo. I don't even play with other people, and I play that game every day. And I get out, with tons of samples on the hardest difficulty. I just blow through it solo. So I'm still doing that. I'm still gaming today. I just don't have time to do, like, the competition thing. So I play like an hour of something every day, and usually it's either Helldivers 2. Before that, it was Phantasy Star Online 2. When I play Phantasy Star Online 2, I play 4 characters at the same time, like split screen with a quad.
Whoa.
Like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I know it's so on the GameCube, the thing had 4 controller ports. In Phantasy
Uh-huh.
Star Online, you could play like four characters with 4 controllers. I'm like, well, what if I had 4 accounts? And I played Phantasy Star Online 2 with like 4 controllers at the same time. I get 4 times the money and 4 times the
Mm.
items. Why not? So that's
Yeah.
what I do, when I
Yeah,
when
and
I
you have
log
the
on.
have the ability to like split your own sensibility into quad things and do the inputs. Uh yeah, I'm not sure I'd be capable of something like that, right? Like just biologically or have the experience or whatever to do it, to
I
succeed in
didn't
it.
think I would either at first, but if you just sometimes I find it fun just to do something fun with a game and see how far I can push it. And that's kind
Hmm.
of where the breaking the game mentality comes in, where it's just like, well, what if I do this with this game? How far could I push it? Could I actually find something that no one has found before? And almost every game that I really enjoy, I'll find some kind of quirk about it that I'll push just for the lulls, just
Right.
to
Right.
just to make it, like, freak out or just make it a little funny with it. And I'll find an exploit or something, and then do something really funny with it.
Yeah.
So
Rad.
Nest Tetris has that kind of built in, where it has this kind of janky programming, and it leads to all the happy coincidences that led to our competitive community becoming so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I had one question saved up, or a thought basically, which was um, going back to the show and the finals and how this all turned out. Um, One of the things maybe we can talk about a little bit is the difference between the loss for Harry in 2013 and then the loss for Jonas in 2014 and how they processed that loss.
Um,
Because one of the things that came up was in interviews, um, Jonas, the way Jonas's travel schedule was set up, he like left. He booked it out of there and got on a plane immediately after the finals. He even posted a picture like on the way to the airport of like him with the silver T-piece on the seat on the train going to the airport. And later he commented that part of what made that so hard for him is he didn't have time or closeness to actually process that loss with his community. Um,
um,
and it wasn't intentional. I think people at the time were like, "Where did Jonas go? Did he leave because he's mad?" And the answer was like, "No, his flight's in like an hour. He's got to go." So he wasn't at the after party, for example. And then the year before, though, Harry did go out with a bunch of friends, and they spent that night like going through it and trying to just be like, just to process it, to be like, what just happened? I was so close to victory, and then I didn't get it. I thought that those were an interesting, like a mirrored situation, right? And it's sort of a reminder, I think, for new champions or new competitors that, you know, you will have losses. Losses will happen. And then when the losses do happen, what are you going to do about it? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that I really like that your documentary had that post interview, or you went back to, you showed clips from 2013,
Mm-hmm.
and then you actually showed me talking to Harry about, like in the pregame interview,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
talking about. So there's a lot of you get to see different sides of that situation from different parts and different styles of interviews, whether it was the footage you shot in 2015 or the footage that happened to be around in 2013 and 2014. That framed like those outcomes very well, and I think that was really important to see, because I know that stuff happened, but being able to see the players kind of live through that, and having the last episode show that Jonas actually came back with a streak right afterwards as a result, this crazy timeline thing, like you
Mm-hmm.
actually making the documentary might have led to his second streak.
I think it contributed. So like the other thing he said in that was that a big contributor was Heather saying like, you know, I process the loss, but keep going because you still are you. But yeah, I mean, the fact that he said that, I take him at his word that like, you know, but this actually brings up another point, which is when I interviewed those two champions, it became, I wasn't expecting this, but the two of them treat looking at old game tape totally opposite. So Harry had watched all the game tape of all the things he could possibly get many times, 2013 included. He'd watched 2013 over and over. So he saw the thing where he said, I can't even talk right now. He offered that up, not because I showed him footage, but because he'd already seen it like a lot of times. And when I interviewed him, he'd watched the 2014 thing. I don't know where he got it, but some stream rip or something. He'd watched that many times, was already very familiar with all the games and all the turning points. Jonas had watched literally none of it. Like, he had watched Ecstasy of Order, but he had never looked at any game tape of any previous win or loss. And I was like, seriously? But he's like, yep, I don't watch this stuff. It's just not something, I don't go back to it. And so forcing him, in his words, to watch this thing, I was like, would you mind watching, I actually had him watch two matches. I had him watch the Terry match and then his finals match to kind of give me commentary as he was doing it. And that'll also be a bonus feature, by the way. But that difference in not looking or not looking at game tape, I thought was very interesting. And then what happens when you kind of make somebody look at some game tape is maybe they do see some stuff, right? That actually
So
change their mind.
In your bonus feature, do you add any commentary to like what you're saying now, basically, where you're saying that they have different reactions to being shown footage? Are you able to express that to the audience in the special features in any way?
I probably will, because originally, like, one of the things I try to do in my film work is I try not to be in the movie very much. Like, if the camera doesn't turn on me and I'm like, I'm Chris and I was there in the middle of the thing, let me talk, I try to have like a different narrator and like, yeah, I'm there. Sometimes I ask a question, but in the bonus features, I feel like 1 through 5 is like the movie. And then there's going to be these extra episodes where it's like, okay, yeah, but I still have hours of other stuff that's interesting. So let's just sort of put that. And I think that to introduce those and at key moments in those, I'm going to just talk to camera kind of like this and just that's literally fine. Say because it's like, okay, hey, I want to give some context here. And I don't want to just have it be like text on the screen, but just introduce what's about to happen and maybe keep an eye out for this and then come back.
Yeah, no, that's very important. So I'm glad that you have that. They already have that in mind.
That's my thought. Is because I feel like otherwise I don't want to just dump footage because that's not
I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah,
sweet.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah, and that's Ninja Gamer's asking, if Genesis flight was in an hour, like would the timing have worked out if the thing had gone later? And I mean, I don't know what the timing was, but all I know was he had to go. So
the party usually starts a few hours after.
The party was much later, because it was all the breakdown and tech stuff, and then it's like when it's getting dark. So, he might have had enough time. But another thing that's notable is like the timing for these events was much more predictable in the
Oh,
DAS
right.
era with best of
Yep.
threes, you know, because games could not go longer than about
Yeah.
whatever it
Full
was,
screen,
like 7 minutes,
true
you know.
full screen back then, at
Hmm.
least. Hmm.
Yeah, so being able to do the math of like what is the possible time limit of the whole show, we were pretty accurate. And then as more of the techniques came along, like tapping and rolling, that made things much more complex. And then going to best of fives on so many more of the matches, that also made things longer and more unpredictable because you could have a sweep or you could have, you know, double that number of games. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think let's see if I have any other saved up questions. But I think we've been going for a pretty long time, and I want to just do a quick check. Yeah, we're at an hour and 15, looks like. So I think we should look towards wrapping it, right? If anybody has questions in the chat, or Chris, if you have things you want to talk about, let's bring them in, and then, you know, like, you know, hearts in the chat, hugs kind of thing. But I feel like, I think one thing I want to mention is that I wanted to release this on YouTube primarily as a community thing, because I felt like, especially this week, and the strategy of doing one per day would be, you know, a nice moment for us to look at this together, and have these moments to talk about it, reflect on it, you know. And as I've said other days this week, DMJ, his Twitch name is DMJ_81. He's also each evening doing a similar thing where he's watching the episodes, reacting to them, chatting. And check that out. If you want more of this, that's, I believe it's 6 p.m. Pacific, whatever that is, other time zones. That's happening each evening on his Twitch. And I think that those types of things are what I was hoping would happen. The other thing, quite honestly, is when you're a filmmaker and you're out, like, you know, at the dentist, or somebody asks you, what do you do for work or whatever, and they're like, oh, can I watch your movie? They'll say, oh, is it on Netflix? It's like the most often, the commonest question that I get. And I'm like, no. But the next best answer is it's on YouTube, because literally everybody knows how to get YouTube. Yeah. Even if, like, financially it's not you know, amazing, it's accessible. And so accessibility is in some ways more important than and more valuable, I think, than putting things behind a big paywall, and saying you've got to give me all this money before you can even look at it, you know.
Right. And the fact that it's so community driven, I think you're going to get a lot of support. You know, people are going to end up buying, you know, a physical copy of it, or if you have YouTube with ads, eventually you'll get your watch hours. So yeah, everybody out there, watch this again and again if you can, because when Chris Higgins gets his watch hours, then, you know, it'll start to be monetized, and we'd really like to, you know, get him a return on investment with this thing if possible.
Yeah. In the chat, Robin Lay is asking, what is the proper capitalization of the of in best of five? I think it's lowercase. I just think it looks better. But the soundtrack has an uppercase O.
Oh, interesting.
So, you know, I mean, controversy time. I think they're all good. It's fine. And often I'll present the title in all caps, you know, like mega caps. So it doesn't, you know, it's just sort of is what it is.
I'd like to comment about the soundtrack too. I really think it's awesome. Like,
right.
I don't know, like, I didn't know how much work was being put into it, but there's something about it, like the fact that you kind of work in the classic Tetris themes, like especially the ones that, like, you know, the ones that everybody knows, like the Game Boy kind of, you know, and in different ways, like, you know, upbeat versions and sad versions, and, you know, like energetic versions, and it's just kind of sprinkled throughout. Nothing else really does that. Like, not even like the real Tetris movie does that. So I really enjoyed it, and great job on that.
Yeah, and that's all Carl King. So Carl King, we've been friends since high school. He is this amazing musician who he had done some work on doing, you know, scores for films and stuff. And so when I came along and said, do you want to do the music for the film? I think he was like, yeah, that sounds really exciting and interesting. And so the way that music responds to and then amplifies what's going on, it's, if you were to, and I can actually show this in a later stream at some point, but like if you delete the music from most of these scenes, the scenes become meaningless. Like they don't have any emotional impact at all. And there's even things like, whenever I've watched this live with people, there's a moment when we introduce Quaid and the music switches over into kind of a grunge theme. So Quaid has his own theme where it's like bump, 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 and it's like, distorted guitars and stuff. It feels really appropriate for the person that we're meeting.
Mhm.
People like notice that in the moment, and they're like, "Hey, that does," like, "Oh, it's the Quaid song, right?" And the way that, like you're saying, the reinterpretation of that classic Tetris set of notes, right?
Mhm.
That theme is used so many times and in so many kind of like unexpected ways that even, you're right, like even in the sad moments, that's able to come in, um, unifies things in this
Yeah.
really unexpected way. Because when I thought it was going to be score, I wasn't sure if we were just talking about like. Also, by the way, it's like orchestral score plus rock. So you've
Mhm.
got this mixture of, and not just rock, but like heavy metal often. So you've got like, double kick drum things happening, and then there's like a string section, and then it's a harp, and it works, I think. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of credit goes to Carl in thinking that all through and achieving all that stuff. And he plays the instruments and uses orchestral samples for the ones he doesn't play. But yeah, it's a heck of a lot of work. It took a lot of doing on his part. But I'm so proud of that, and I'm waiting for more people to sort of notice that as a piece of work on its own, because the soundtrack album is out now on Bandcamp, and I think that will stand up on its own. And I also think that future filmmakers, when they have something like Tetris, where there are these core themes, think about that. Like, think about whether you can integrate that into your, what
Yeah,
can you
no, it's
do?
it's amazing, and it makes me. I mean, I'm if they ever do make that Tetris anime, maybe he should be the one to do the soundtrack for that too, because that's how I want it to be. Like,
Yeah.
just that I can't see it being any better. It's the best it can be.
Yeah.
It's the five.
Questions in chat. Does Carl also use acoustic instruments or synthesizers? Almost all synth. The drums are synthetic. And he talked about bringing in a real drummer to do it, but we ended up just not doing it for budget reasons and kind of time reasons. But yeah, I mean, the drumming to me sounds completely real. And at one point, he even does a count in that's his voice going 1, 2 with the sticks in episode one. And then you hear this drum fill. It sounds really real to me. I think to him, he can tell the difference, but I can't. But he plays all the basses and guitars. Those are live instruments.
So
So
as a kind of addendum to the feeling I get from when I hear parts of the soundtrack, you might not have a lot of other people notice, or well, you'd have to have been there. So in the NWC, I mentioned there's that live DJ, and he
mm,
would actually add background music to the NWC competition, and it played out in a very similar way to how Carl King's soundtrack is used in Best of Five, and there's a lot of parallel drama building and the feeling of it, and even some of the riffs are very similar to what was used by Steve Tricus at the NWC, and I actually really appreciate it. I don't think it was intentional, because it's too
uh-huh.
hard to go back to NWC footage to try to emulate that,
Right, yeah.
but it really did like do a good job of bringing that feel of competitive Tetris that I know, and took it to a new level.
Right. Right on. Well, all right. Yeah, I think that we can call it a wrap. I just wanted to say again, thank you, Chris, for your time today, for your time in 2021, and for now 15 years of service to this tournament in a way that, like, that's dedication and generosity that we've all benefited from, and I appreciate it so deeply. And I know that we've often worked, in like nearby over the years.
Mhm.
You're over in
Yeah.
the comms booth, and I'm like pointing cameras at people and running around. But like seeing that consistency, like you show up over and over and over, and so like I appreciate that, and I appreciate you and what you're doing, and I appreciate you as a human being
Thank you.
having
I
human
really
values. Like that is something
thank
that's
you. I,
really
I appreciate
important.
being appreciated. Thank you for your camera work, and a lot of the history being documented is so important to us now, because we did not know when we started this back in
Right,
2010 that we would have Tetris champions like Blue Scooty being broadcasted around the world, with
right.
news broadcasts and tons of attention, and the records being broken, and where we are now today having this record. Like, did you have a crystal ball? Because I didn't know.
No, right. And like the fact that things like Jonas naming the pole vault, like it's a little historical tidbit, but like the fact that we
Right.
had that footage on a hard drive somewhere, those little things, those are nuggets of history that I want to make sure don't get lost. So I
Yeah,
thought
I
those are
really like that
important to me.
segment. I said this in the chat, but I really like that segment at the end of the last episode where you kind of covered little bits of our culture
Mm-hmm.
and explained that for the audience, like what a Mullen is and things like that. Like that was really cool. That was something I think people are gonna find, like, even if they just came for the Tetris, being able to find out about our community, and then when they actually watch something, like on like the CTWC broadcast, and they'll understand when we say what a Mullen is. They'll think, oh, okay, that was
Yeah.
explained over here. So having that reference, and that just makes our community stronger. Having having things like that around, and it almost makes me sad because I know that this took out a lot. This took 10 years to do, and it took a lot out of you. And I want more of this, but where's it gonna come from, right? Like, it's
We'll find a way. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I'm not going anywhere, but I'm going to take a little break when I'm done with the bonus features.
Enjoy this release. That's
yeah.
the big thing, because that was the thing that I was gonna ask you if I had a question. Is like, so when's the sequel? When's Ecstasy of Order 3 coming out? But it's like, okay, I know this took 10 years to do, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of work and a lot of happy coincidences that went to make it. One thing I do want to ask you though is, did the events of the past year, like the utter craziness of the records being smashed and the Blue Scooty game crash, did that actually change like the tail end of this, like your release getting stepped up to
No.
meet that demand?
Yeah, so this is wild. So I remember it was like it was kind of like December into January. I was actually in Pittsburgh helping out with a family member who was doing some surgery and just needed like some health care. And I'd brought my editing drives, because the drives for this, by the way, there's 22 terabytes of source material, and so it's a large physical thing to bring with me. So I brought my laptop and I brought that, and I was set up to do that. And at some point in there, I found out the CDWC was not going to be in like September or October. That was my intended launch date.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, wait, it's going to be in like June? So I suddenly was like, oh, no. And I was like, okay, I got to accelerate everything. What can I do? How do I crash through this next bit of it? And then, the Scooty thing happens, and things begin to really just like light on fire.
Yeah.
Now, so those two things, I think I got the CDWC news first, and then the Scooty thing happened. But it turned out that releasing it the time I did, if I had done a year earlier, there'd be less interest in Tetris in general. If I did it like, a year later, I'm sure things will be kind of calmer. So hitting that point, it was like kind of surprisingly, I couldn't have planned it, and it was a happy accident, like so many things in the community and in life,
The divine Tetris thing, whatever that is.
All the things just came together, and I think, but one more thing about like, Ecstasy of Order, like originally this show was called Ecstasy of Order 2. That was the working title for years. And then I think there is tons, obviously so much room to make a third part, because there's 10 more years and there's the whole future. And like part of it, I think, is I would be more than happy, kind of like Adam passed that torch to me, to pass that torch to somebody else. And there's some people probably in the chat right now who I can think of who really could do that work.
Yeah. For me personally, I just have this huge vision of the anime series and what season, there's the Joseph season and the Jonas season and all that stuff. And I'm like, could I, I like writing. Maybe I should try to write a script or something, right?
Yeah.
Like that might be something. And then, that gets given to some like really awesome anime producer or something. I don't know. But
I think that's the future. And we should, get excited about these projects that we can do, I think, because, not
like
everything has to
other
be
things. You have to show that it's possible. Like, Joseph showed that the teenagers that it was possible to be a Tetris champion. You're showing that, you can aim to shoot, a documentary in 2014, take 10 years to release it and then nail it and have it be way more relevant, just because of all the things that have happened, and be able to frame it just right. So I think, if you do pass the torch on to someone else, then we've got some great examples of how to do it right.
Thank you so much. I mean, the stars align and they continue to align. So I think on that note, thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody in the chat. Thank you, everybody who's watched this thing.
And,
I appreciate all the response, and it's such a joy to go from working on this sort of like alone in this room for a lot of the time to be able to be like, okay, now we can all talk about it. There's no more,
10 years of build up and finally, having that product out there and for people to enjoy. And I think we were talking yesterday in the tech test. This is just the beginning.
Yeah.
As more and more people find out about it,
Yeah,
and
we're
as we
five
run
days
more
in,
events,
right?
yeah, we'll
Yeah.
be helping promote it and talking about it and say, hey, do you like what you've seen here? Here's an example of history. It was took 10 years to make, but it's go enjoy it. It's there for you.
Yeah. Right on. All right. Well, thank you all, and let's sign off. I'm going to hit the
Hey,
button.
boom,
Hearts in the
Tetris
chat if
for
you see it.
you.
Boom, Tetris for you, Chris. Thanks.